Welcome students. Finally, Sheikh Hasina has resigned from Premiership of Bangladesh. You all might be seeing various videos on this, and at least you might have read in newspaper about the issue. But today, we're trying something interesting that is essential to learn as lesson, not just from politics, but also which is relevant to our examination. We would not just understand the story, we would also understand lessons to be learnt to apply from basics of NCERT that is philosophical enough to understand, and also to a kind of analytical thing which you can use it in your essays and ethics as well. So let's begin. Today we are discussing about lessons to be learnt from Bangladesh protest. Before getting into the lessons, let's just understand what actually happened. Long story short, Sheikh Hasina before elections has introduced a quota, and this quota to provide reservations of as high as 30% to a section of people who are descendants, either son, daughter, grandchildren of freedom fighters, is what she intended to do. With around 40% of unemployed between 15 to 25 in Bangladesh, students of various universities started protesting against this quota. They sought legal measures, and even after the Supreme Court judgment to stay, Sheikh Hasina had to withdraw this before elections. And in elections, she almost went uncontested as opposition was not participating. So the elections also has some cue to take. No opposition. So if you look at these things, it was suspecting that a kind of dictatorship was, at least a monopoly over the governance, was seen by Sheikh Hasina. The centralization of power, not just from the other wings, also judiciary, opposition, none of them were present. So a kind of committed judiciary was seen. When you say committed judiciary, it is not commitment towards law, it is commitment towards the premier of the government. This is what the scenario was. And with violent protests that broke after the elections, you need to understand what social justice and reservations are. Are they really emotional to appeal? As if you're giving some reservations to freedom fighters' descendants? Is freedom fighters to be as glorified that the emotional aspect is enough to provide reservations? Is the question. Bangladeshis protested. There were huge internet shutdowns, and even after the shutdowns, the protests continued. The civil society was completely different, even vibrant enough to protest against the glory of a ruler who was descendant of founding father of Bangladesh. Even Sheikh Hasina's glory can't help. After almost 2000 officially, and even more people either injured or lost their lives, the society was not ready to accept premiership doing. So the lessons to be learned among them, the first one is, in the name of social justice, the percentage of quota you could reserve is also important. It needs a rational backing than emotional one. So freedom fighter glorification is emotional one, but you need rational backing. The number of people who form the diaspora of descendants of freedom fighters were merely 0.13 percentage, and the quota of 30% was way too huge. The doubts were creeping in that this 30% will allow the near and dear and the loyalists of Sheikh Hasina would get into the government. So, in the name of reservation, if you try to appease a particular section, the rest of the section may revolt. Of course, in India, the social justice so far has been better than what it went to be in Bangladesh. Supreme Court of India even struck down Maratha reservation because the empirical data was not provided, at least it was not ready to support the quota. So, the proof that it is a weaker section and a particular section has been beneficial only due to its backwardness is what the quota should justify. In India, at least so far, it is there. That's the reason in India, no constitutional measures are broken. No civil society is protesting to a level to abolish the reservation, because the quota is at least justified by the rational backing with empirical data. Of course, with the caste census, it may even make it better. So this empirical data to support the claim was again similar to what Supreme Court of India was expecting in Maratha reservation. Hope you understood this lesson. Then probably you can have an extra point which is rational enough to add in your answers wherever the social justice or reservation concepts would surf in. Because with the judgments of sub-classification of scheduled castes or even the caste census being in news, you may expect questions on that, and this can help you. Another lesson is about the socio-economic conditions. As we mentioned, the protests are due to the non-utilization of demographic dividend. Bangladesh is as young as India, if not more. 40% of its population being unemployed. This demographic dividend is unutilized, and they formed core of what the protesters were. So to utilize this, the socio-economic conditions are essential. The social conditions were polarized enough not to accept the emotional angle of saying freedom fighters' children can get anything else. On the other side, this demographic dividend was expecting employment, and the unemployment along with inflation was prime thing that was necessary to fuel a kind of civil war conditions that were existing. Not always civil war will be opposed by the military. In this condition, military is different. To understand that, this socio-economic conditions need to be understood. In Bangladesh, unlike the theocratic state of Pakistan from which they separated, multiculturalism at least prevails. What is multiculturalism? It is a pluralism that accepts various cultures to prevail rather than a religion or a language to thrive. So the unity among the unemployed, where unity among the students of various universities was very strong enough to gel and fight against the ruler. So, do we need a committed judiciary is another lesson. As I said, the committed judiciary is committed towards what you call as the premiership or the head of the state was controlling the judiciary. It was not committed towards the law. It was not committed towards upholding the constitution, but it was committed towards the head of the state. Similar conditions were seen in emergency in 1976 in India, where similar kind of protests were seen in the civil society. So this civil society is vibrant enough in Bangladesh as it was during emergency conditions in India. So, the lesson is about why civil society and opposition is necessary is to be learnt. My friend, any government is apprehensive of civil war, is afraid of dissent, and this dissent is absorbed by civil society, and along with civil society it is opposition, political opposition, which advocates as a representative would reduce the mass mobilization against government during dissent. So these two together would act as shock absorbers. That means civil society is very much essential to reduce civil war towards the government. So government needs which forms a superstructure, needs a shock absorber from masses. These masses, when try to attack on government to dethrone them, this civil society will help to absorb this as they form along with opposition. We need to stop the civil war. At least the system would prevail, the government would prevail. This confidence is essential. To understand this, you can just visit the political science in CRT. You would understand why civil society is required and why political opposition is required. Because unless the representatives attack the government, people may directly get in, which is dangerous situation. If you understand this, let's move on to the next lesson. And the next lesson is about what is democracy. Is it a form of government as we learn in initial classes? More than anything else, democracy is culture. Democracy is not just about elections. It is a procedural democracy. To substantive democracy to prevail, again, listen this part carefully. For substantive democracy to prevail, we need deliberative and along with the deliberative, we need participative democracy. Which means democracy as a culture or a way of life prevails when there is deliberation in lawmaking. The order of reservation which was passed in Bangladesh, if it is deliberated by opposition, which virtually didn't exist as 99% of the seats were captured unanimously with opposition boycotting the elections. This deliberative democracy was missing. And this resulted in participative democracy leading to an upsurge. So, democratic upsurge was seen. This participative democracy is nothing but the protest by students which attempted to dethrone the dictator directly is seen. So, all in all, we can say India is thriving as a system. The constitutional breakdown was not completely seen. If not, only once during the emergency we found some discrepancies. Otherwise, it was smooth enough to survive. Our constitution was smooth enough to survive because democracy as a culture prevailed in India. Unlike the Sri Lanka, which experienced, Pakistan, which experienced, and even Nepal found similar situation. In South Indian, in South Asian region, only India could thrive as a post-colonial state despite its illiteracy that was existing in initial days and today's multiculturalism. Despite the diversity, we found it as a dividend rather than disadvantage because we had opposition to deliberate, we had civil society to participate. So those people were responsible to uphold the culture of democracy. This is what the scenario is. Hopeful this discussion will be helpful to produce a better essay and write as part of the rights issue in your GS2 paper. And along with that, it might be helpful for you to write in ethics. So another concept we need to understand what actually sovereignty means. What actually sovereignty means? In a democracy, does sovereignty exist in government? Government, as far as acts as a representative of people, understanding people's notions and people's ideas, the sovereignty would be at least transferred to the government. As soon as there is disconnect between people and government, sovereignty gets its original meaning that the people are ultimate source of power, the people themselves. So the citizens of the country will take the sovereignty back from government. The very social contract by which the government is established would be cancelled and they would try to sign a better agreement again with a new setup. Now, with dictator, at least the so-called dictator dethroned, will Bangladesh find its war completed and is it a second freedom that they got? No, the actual war begins now because after dethroning someone else, you need the post to be filled by a responsible government. Now, hopeful that the students would actually take that responsibility and they would be part of the government. Let's hope so. And now, one interesting thing about military, because the military was responsible to ensure students would at least triumph. Students triumph because military supported. The interesting part of the story is that the military chief gave an ultimatum to Sheikh Hasina to vacate within 45 minutes and they refused from attacking students as they didn't find them anti-national, as any dictator would use the term to delusion and diffuse the protest. So, essentially you need to understand that the military, unlike being a brute force which usually we assume, stood by democracy. So military, at least till the instant we know, it might change its stance in next coming days, but today democracy was upheld by military in Bangladesh. So military felt the very purpose is to protect the sovereignty and the very purpose of military is to ensure people are getting what they needed. It might dethrone or at least not support the government. It was with the country to thrive as a whole. So they were not manufacturing consent, but they were actually earning and gaining and winning the consent together with the people who were protesting. So with all these stories about Bangladesh as a case study, we understood what is it for India? Will India be okay with the conditions existing in a neighboring state? Because the Awami League was favorable party to India. The insurgency of ULFA, United Liberation Front of Assam, was taking residence in Bangladesh and this Awami League helped India to weed it out. The opposition, which is Bangladesh Nationalist Party, was supporting this ULFA. So now India need to be careful enough to understand the scenario. India needs democracy, but it needs a favorable conditions that will not allow insurgency to take rest. So, India has other issues as well. China may appease Bangladeshis if Bangladesh Nationalist Party comes into the power to take up its projects rather than Indian. Even the Teesta River sharing may get jeopardized. The other conditions in India, which needs no more hostile neighbor, would wish students would take up. The students of Bangladesh would be actively part of the government rather than an immature Bangladesh Nationalist Party. Even the military, which at least made sure there is no retribution happening. Already, those who were supporting Awami League, the students' wing, are being attacked. So, even after the thousands of lives lost, any action of retribution may damage the democratic fabric. So, we hope that there won't be any retribution, rather than the peace would prevail, as the demand, the 9-point demand which were put forward by students, were at least fulfilled by the single agenda of resignation of Sheikh Hasina, who would take refuge in London. So, broadly, rather than just knowing the story, we try to understand the lessons to be learned from this story. The case study is very much essential to understand the concepts of democracy, sovereignty, why civil society is required, and how the relations might prevail with India hereafter. Let's hope we would understand things better and deal carefully with this volatile situation in our neighborhood, and India would benefit from the conditions, and also be careful enough not to let the similar situation happen in India, as the cultures would reverberate with the neighbors. Another day, I'll be back before you with better video that would help you with your preparation. Till then, thank you.